it's a marvelously broad topic, the cloud education and policy, that I hope is going to allow us to go back at several themes that have been raised already today and pursue them from different angles and also break into some new territory. And we have a suitably broad panel here to address these questions. I'm not going to go through long introductions. I'm just going to name people and they'll talk about themselves as we go along. But starting at my right, and Balsamo, who you've already met, Shadman, Zafar from Verizon, Jessie, McReynolds from Microsoft, which you can see from his shirt, and Adam Schrock, who's a Ph.D. student here at USC. So let's start with the cloud, which we're going to begin by defining very broadly. As much as a development in the way we approach information digitally as a technical or business development. Think of the cloud as signifying a breakout moment where your interaction with knowledge goes far beyond the machine that's in front of you. Where the device really has simply become a way of accessing information, utilities, ways of expressing your thoughts about that information and those utilities that exist far beyond the device. And that where the boundaries of the kind of data that you can access and the ways you can manipulate it are extraordinarily multiplied by the ability to do those processes someplace else, wherever this is. So it is like the growth of social networking you were discussing this morning, enormously magnifies the possibility of the user, just as social networking allows relationships with a far higher number of people than was possible before that development. So too the cloud allows relationships with far more different types of knowledge and far more ways of actually manipulating that knowledge than were possible before. And so we're posing this as a large kind of metaphor, and one that if you can look in many different domains to find expressions of it. We'll talk about some in the enterprise world. We'll talk about what potential applications are in a classroom. If you look in journalism, there's a project called Document Cloud, where now over 200 news organizations are posting material on the cloud and using open source tools to analyze it, sometimes sharing them, sometimes in private, sometimes using it as a publication vehicle. But it's an interesting experiment because of the nature of collective work that's involved and the element of collaboration that's developed out of this in the birth of this project. Begun by 2 news organizations, ProPublica and the New York Times, now, as I said, involving more than 200, sometimes operating in their own little world, sometimes opening up and saying, can anybody help me with this project? And then sometimes using this as a publication tool. So it's not just a matter of expanding the size or the scope of your reach, but also changing the way you work. And this is one of the things that we want to pursue, is how the ability to use utilities that exist beyond the device change the way we form collaborations. The possibilities of collective work that were being discussed earlier today seem to be greatly expanded by the ability to work in the cloud. The challenge, of course, is not to be betrayed by simple size. All of us who do research know that simply increasing the sample size doesn't improve your knowledge of anything if there's not the analytical devices, the methodology that goes with it, and then ultimately the ideas that help interpret it and translate those ideas into something predictive. So where I think we're on the early stages of the challenge is understanding how you take this new capability and translate it into real improvements in our abilities to know things and talk about the things we know. And that's kind of some of the ground we're going to try and cover here in the next hour. One way to start, and I think we've got to sort of rewind this a little bit. We're very lucky to have Jessie here, who's been involved in some of the actual development of cloud computing. We're going to start with just a little bit of background, a little bit of a look back on how we got to where we are.
And that's the thing. You start off by saying this is a new capability, but if we look back, education was the original consumers of cloud computing, going back to time sharing in the 1970s and 80s. We've seen this evolution of terminology, and oftentimes that's been coupled with a change in capability, but we're most often talking about the same sets of things. Time sharing into the ASP model of the late 90s, application service providers. Now, of course, when the dot-com crash, when the dot-com era crashed, that term sort of fell by the wayside because it was associated with business models that weren't so successful. And so it was replaced with software as a service, and at Microsoft we call it software plus services. Once again, referring to the same model of outsourcing and externalizing IT capabilities. Now, going to the present, software as a service, the term diversified as the market matured. Now we see terms like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, all of which are referring to different ways, different levels of dealing with IT capabilities. And we sort of then wrap that around into cloud. And of course, I'm talking about a much more granular level than Roberto was, of really just about the IT part, not about the insensitivity to the type and origin of your data. And so, finally we get to this cloud era. And I think one of the properties of these previous eras of cloud computing was a massive amount of hype, which was then resulted in a lot of disappointment and bad press later on. And I would say that there's a word of warning here, that cloud computing will not necessarily revolutionize everything that we do in the next 5 years. That this is a journey that will take some time. The investments, for example, that Microsoft has made have a much longer time horizon than you would expect. Certainly longer than VCs think about. And I think there's one last thing to hit, which is, well, where does the term cloud computing come from? And the story that I've heard is basically any time in software where you draw a diagram of your architecture, of your software system, or of your network, you use a cloud to represent the internet, or something where the transmission format, the way in which a service is delivered is irrelevant to you. And that's a great, that makes the cloud into a great metaphor where, looking at Roberto's idea that this is more than just IT services, it's any time where you're getting something where you don't really care how it's stored, how it's delivered, you really just care about accessing it in a transparent fashion.
And continue the conversation forward. And we're soon going to go freeform. But we have one other piece of information to put before you. It makes sense to have some kind of specific example. So we have something, a concrete instance to discuss. And we're very lucky that there's a really fascinating project that's unfolding right before us here, which Andrew's going to talk about.
Thank you so much. So Jessie has been really helpful on this project, and also great thanks to our team, Surath and Arjun. And so everyone has been really pulling together to put together this prototype, and right now, you saw some screenshots of it in the introduction, but this is basically what we're proposing as one possibility of how you can do education on the cloud. And really, it's a multimedia learning environment that focuses on, we used to call them kind of online lesson plans, but I'm going to talk about how this is looking somewhat beyond the idea of lesson plans. They're called challenges because students and parents and teachers challenge each other. So it's not like a contest where you kind of fill out a bunch of prescribed areas and therefore you filled in all of the areas correctly, you win. No, it's kind of more, it has an evolutionary quality to it. So these challenges are basically like open environments that can be remixed and rewritten. And in the rewriting and the remixing, learning happens. So if you think about how the saying, the best way to learn something is to teach it, maybe you don't say this very much if you're not in a classroom environment, but those of us who are tend to say it a lot because it really presses you to bring yourself up to a certain level. You need to have a personalized mastery of the material. So to give you one example of a challenge that we enjoy a lot is called How Wide is a Line? And this really encourages students to reflect on and find borders in their lives by looking at borders in real life or even invisible borders that might exist between people. So to map the boundaries between us. And so in doing this, in collecting media online, in collecting images, in collecting information through, let's say, Wikipedia, or there aren't really any restrictions in where you can go, and this is sort of where the cloud comes into it. In doing this, they complete the challenge. So again, they're kind of challenging each other because you get different versions of the same idea. And so there's a tremendous diversity there. So as concerns cloud computing, it can draw on the power of the web for media information and opinions. So it's cloud, so we're playing on the cloud, if you want to think about it that way, in two ways. One, you can use the internet and the web to find media information and opinions and bring them back into this environment. And then this environment actually physically, the way it's stored, the way it lives, is on the cloud. So it interacts with the public environment of the web that's open to sharing. So we get kind of beyond the walled gardens, and we end up sort of getting to the point where we have teachers and students and parents. I think parents, not just because it's my own research area, tend to get overlooked in the education equation a lot. So bringing them into the mix as well as active participants. So that is basically what the playground is at this moment. We have a functional prototype that we can put some pictures up of as well if you didn't catch them in the introduction.
Yeah, Shadman, and I want you to, let's pursue the idea of education for a moment here. It's the specifics of the use of cloud as in play, as a specific application in a learning environment, but also the broader notion of engaging this world in a process of learning. Be sure to use your microphones. Do you have one of them?
So first of all, I want to thank you for making the point that cloud is not something new. This is something that's an evolution that carries on. We have the web was cloud to many people. I mean, for the time sharing and everything else. However, we feel each time that technology changes by a factor of 5 to 10 times, the same thing that you had before becomes a revolution. So, and what I mean by that is that, so I'll give a couple of examples. So, computer used to have those floppy disks. Does anybody remember floppy disks? There are a couple of people, you guys just aged yourself there. But, right, so at that point, the computer used to be a number crunching tool. When the storage capacity of the media switched from 1.44 megabyte to 600 megabyte or so, computers switched fundamentally from a Excel sheet, or for your Excel sheet, but we'll just 1, 2, 3 of them, to a media entertainment device. There was a fundamental shift. It was not an evolution, and it happened. It's not that because we had computer before or not, because there was a 10 times switch of the capacity. Similar thing happened when the screen became high quality, not VGA screens, but became full color screens above NTSC quality, and the processing was fast enough. They became replacements of TVs and video games. We see that the cloud, in the terms that we talk today, has happened because another big revolution is occurring, which is also 5 to 10 times of progress from the past, which is how we connect to the internet. So it used to be, 300 bauds, 1050. Most people in this room probably don't even know what baud stands for. Any? One. So that's good. Two. Okay, good. But it's bits, right? 300 baud is 300 bits, not bytes, not megabytes. And now we are with the 4G network on the wireless side, and sort of, landline connections many of you have at home. It is 10 to 1,000 times increase, which creates another kind of revolution, which I would sort of submit to you guys as what we call cloud. So in that space, key things fundamentally change, not in education and generally how we interact with services. First, 2 or 3 things which are related with just general, I would say, technology flow has changed. It used to be that technology used to flow from businesses to consumers. So your office used to be technically advanced place, and your home was not. I would guarantee you today, our living rooms are the high-tech mecca, and we would love to get those things in my office. But that's a very fundamental change. There's a direction of flow of technology has switched from business to consumer. That used to be the case, and now is from consumer to business. Devices, technologies get introduced there, and then gets adapted into the business.
See, but that said, I think that in the cloud we're seeing something. Actually, the flow is interesting.
I would say the same thing. It's the Facebook and the Twitter is a consumer, and then the collaboration is moving up into the business.
Yeah, and ultimately you're right, that it's the large-scale private clouds created to support consumer online services,
exactly.
Which in turn is enabling businesses to migrate to the cloud.
Exactly. So it's going backwards, right? I mean, it used to be email was a business product, and then it flowed into a consumer. It has gone the other way around. So now, long-winded answer to your question. I want to sort of put that as a background, though, is that earlier today we discussed social networks, and right now as we are talking about clouds, I think the next big step is, so we are actively utilizing many of the services to consume the information and share the information. I feel, and a couple of things that we have seen as a result of massive collaboration into the cloud are evolution of products like Wikipedia, that in some sense puts information at the tip of the tongue for everybody at a fraction of a second. One concern I feel in the education space for that is it has added to the what I call sort of bullet item list based knowledge. So people know things by 5 bullets they read in Wikipedia, which is great because it quickly helps you solve certain problems. I can get to any piece of information within a fraction of a second on my cell phone by typing something into a Google search bar and getting whatever it is on the Wikipedia. The other problem with that is it gives people perception or a feeling of knowing deep knowledge. And sometimes, that may not be the case. You have not spent enough energy to really understand how the quantum mechanics works when you can just recite the first 2 or 3 interesting details about it out of Wikipedia. So,
happy that you absolve PowerPoint from the destruction of
I didn't say PowerPoint explicitly. Absolutely, no fault of PowerPoint. But so to bring it to the point of education where we need to go next, I think these tools created by the cloud capabilities today are phenomenal. The value we need to take to the next level is, in an earlier conversation we were talking about the teaching versus cultivating. I think there's almost an opportunity of re-looking at the education in a slightly different way. Not thinking about that, how would we make our book more, not book, our lecture more interactive, let's say, through some piece of technology, but say that the specific pieces of information are at the tip of the tongue of the student anyways. You start by actually problem solving and experimentation, and let the teaching part take place. So traditionally, the learning takes place by teaching first, letting the student absorb the information, and then do the application. I think that cycle can be now turned upside down. With cloud at the tool at your hand to say, you have the education, here's a problem we got to solve. Figure it out. And the learning needs to take place by virtue of utilizing these tools and solving a specific problem. So I think cloud has that. So again, to your answer, I think so the next step to take it to is using these cloud services as a forgiven pieces to the, in an education environment, and let the problem solving take the front stage.
Okay, where do I begin? Okay, I'm going to bracket the notion that learning, teaching, and problem solving is the kind of the critical task there. So I'm going to bracket that. Let me maybe problematize the notion of revolution, and certainly revolutions that are caused by technologies. That everybody who's an academic in this room in cultural studies would require me to say that technologies don't cause revolutions. Technologies are not the agents of revolutions. They are interestingly, complexly situated in all kinds of practices that are changing. And one of the things that is definitely changing, that happens to be enabled, coincides, and drives the development of technology, is the imagination of the people who get the 300 baud, right? And then they start thinking, wow, what could I do faster, faster? The faster is not an imperative. The faster, as if it's in the technology and it's a natural evolution. It happens because of the intervention of those who are working with the technology, the devices, the applications, and they start asking the questions, what if I could do it quicker, faster, and so on. So it's not, it's not the organic notion technology somehow evolve and then cause revolutions. It's that the access to the technologies starts stimulating us to think differently, and then we start formulating problems that are not already well formed. So we're like, if I want to deliver video, what if I, because the early web was terrible at that. So, we didn't deliver video better because the web got faster. We worked on fastness because somebody thought, I really would like to share videos, because video recorders and players and digitizing became more consumer friendly and the price points came down. So the complication is to remember that agency is not in the hands of the technology, it's always in this kind of complicated relationship with people. And it will be a source of imaginative inspiration. It will be a source of frustration and disappointment. And so, I remember the earlier quote in the earlier panel about disappointment is the engine of innovation. So for as much as we're frustrated that the cloud doesn't do what we want, we will see all sorts of innovation coming out of exactly out of its constraints and its failures. Right, so the story's complicated about the revolution. We remember, and I will bring this around to the cloud, because remember, we live in one moment of information plenitude. Civilization has been the history of information plenitudes for the people who have existed on the planet at that moment. So people used to like to think that the Gutenberg revolution was a revolution because it did and was kind of implicated again in a kind of a set of social practices, political practices, changes in power relations that made this information plentitude real for people who had not had that kind of privileged relationship to knowledge from the church and so on. Anyway, so we have to kind of, I think, back away a little bit about the revolution discourse on this. And it does get kind of the point to the cloud because, and actually this draws on research that's been going on at Microsoft for a long time, which is, what as the metaphor, the reigning metaphor for the information plenitude, that is what the cloud is. It is everything that is out there. And Kathy Marshall, who's a colleague of mine who I used to work with at Xerox PARC, who's at Microsoft now, she has this phrase that says, the truth is not in the cloud. And by that, she doesn't mean, because she's been doing research on how do people contribute to the cloud, how do they archive their sense of self now in the cloud, and my sense of self is all over the place and nowhere, right? And so she's been at Microsoft looking at people's archiving and tagging processes. And what she means is it's not that the cloud is erroneous. She's not saying that. She's saying there are many truths in the cloud. The truth is not out there. That's the myth, right? It's that there are many truths, and that makes it almost harder for us as teachers and educators. Because now, with this access, enabled by mobile technologies that are now allowing us not to just have to access stuff at our information terminals at libraries or classrooms. Now I can get information, access, and so on, but is it information? Is it opinion? Is it rhetoric? Is it polemic? Is it propaganda? Is it what genre of information am I getting? Am I getting the story? Am I getting bits and pieces of the story? Am I getting 3 points that need to be connected, but I've now missed the fourth point that really wraps the story, together. And so the issue about opening our classrooms, which to the media flows, and to recognize the information plenitude that is the cloud, makes the infrastructure of what goes on in that classroom even more important. Because it's that whole thing. We know this. We have to give students expert readings of how you read a wiki page, a Wikipedia page. I have to demonstrate for them how do you read it critically so that they can understand that you don't just take Wikipedia as a reference, not because it's bad necessarily, but because where the information comes from is as much about what the information is. So, there are, and I'll tell you the sites I use. I use cloaking sites. I go, if you type in Martin Luther King and you go, the second hit on Google is a site it's a cloaking site for a white supremacist group. You have, so the infrastructure of how I model for them my own harvesting of that information cloud becomes a critical point in them learning what the cloud's value is and what their just-in-time learning or knowledge acquisition needs to also be doing.
So let me see if I can restate your problem. Is that when we transition in the classroom from authoritative references to information transparency, we don't know where it came from. We've lost authority. We can no longer. We need to be trained in order to understand the value and context of our content.
Because in some respects, it's the notion and the myth of, it's the issue of transparency that's the issue. It's like knowledge that comes with no records of its own formation becomes very difficult to assess.
And let me pose, take what you're saying, and put it another way, which is, if you look back to the Gutenberg revolution, it generated a whole series of institutions and processes for validating and collecting information, right? For it codified a kind of transparency and authority in its own way. Not drawing a judgment about how good or bad it was, but it evolved rapidly over the first couple hundred years, and it has survived the idea of academic authority, the idea of an encyclopedia, the idea of libraries. There are all kinds of notions that stem from that moment that still very much inform the way we decide whether a piece of information is more valuable than another piece of information. So my question to you is, let's accept the premise that we're kind of in a revolutionary moment. that we don't know, that involves all kinds of agency, technical, human, cultural, institutional, enterprises, all kinds of things are involved in this. Can you see now how this moment is producing new ways of validating information, of that same process of from the mass arriving at a way of helping you understand that this piece of information is more valuable than the clothing website? What's out there that tells us how that's going to develop?
So we tend to look at this information as, of course, text, wiki pages, so on and so forth. But we've also got images and videos, like entirely new values open to us. And we're really used to the search paradigm, Google and so on. I think that there are going to be new ways of organizing that information that are not really apparent to us. A Microsoft example here is a set of technologies called Dragon, which have been used for creating something called photosynth, which is a way of taking large quantities of images and organizing them spatially, so that you can have thousands of images from hundreds of different people and bring them together into a way that makes sense. That's to be sure, it's somewhat abstract to talk about, well, how do you cloak information in there? But you're sort of exposed to so much that it's a different way of looking at it than if you were looking at a Flickr screen.
I'll also add to the point that two things. One point is, so you're saying quantity of information is increasing, quality has gone down, or at least its authenticity is in question. I would argue that is a good thing in the following sense, that is forcing us to teach the students up front to be critical of what they read. So they sort of get the educational street smarts at the beginning of their educational careers. And many times otherwise people would go out, read what they read in the book as the absolute authority and would not question that authority. Now, every written word gets critically evaluated by students, and that is, we are almost being forced into incorporating that as part of our education process. So I think that is actually a good thing of how we, during the education, and we, by the way, may read in Wikipedia a bunch of things which are wrong, but frankly, we may read a bunch of things which are wrong in some textbooks too, and if they're not wrong now, they will be proven wrong a couple of years down the road. But the point is, providing students the focus to say, question authority, we are being forced into doing that, so that's a positive thing in my opinion. The second point I would submit, not done in the same manner, but collaborative creation of information carries the same kind of rules and methods of peer-reviewed research that we have cherished since Gutenberg or before, that before we publish things. Now the thing is that okay, you're peer-reviewed. There are multiple peers who are reviewing Wikipedia, for example, and some things are still correct, and some of the peers are not as qualified as the others should be. So it's a different model. It's not going to have the same caliber, but it's going to increase the quantity. But it's also going to force us to be more critical and analytical, which may, by the way, help us increase learning overall.
One thing about that, though, is it still looks at data in the cloud, data that we're using and accessing in a fairly hierarchical way. There is an authority, there are lesser authorities, and so on. When we deal with one of our deep capabilities is mass quantities of information. I had talked briefly about I went to the Lady Gaga concert at Staples Center, and all these thousands of people recording the concert, just the whole time with their cell phones up. You've got these thousands of videos, all the same thing. How do we say which one is more authoritative than the other? How do you use those thousands of videos? It's not really clear yet. I don't have an answer as far as what we're going to do with that. I think that we'll do something. That's part of those developing emerging institutions or mechanisms that will use that data somehow. But it speaks to the existence of a new kind of data that you know, maybe not always in the classroom, but that is treated differently from that sort of authoritative Wikipedia or bit of knowledge.
And the question may not be which piece of information is more valuable or authentic or whatever of the Lady Gaga. I mean, partly it kind of calls the question of, well, it depends on what do you want to use it for? Why are you interested? What, you know, so value is definitely, you know, contextualized by what am I seeking, you know, seeking information for. Some things, opinions are more valuable in many cases than something that masquerades as fact.
Let's just get Adam in on the conversation. Before I do it, let's throw in one plug for the fact that we're at a university here, and one of the things we certainly supposedly are trying to do is to teach people not just to question authority, but how to become authorities. But there's a process of creating knowledge that is supposed to be a large part of what hopefully we're instilling in our students in various ways, in various professions, in various disciplines. But it's that second part of it, how you become somebody who takes information and transforms it into knowledge, that is ultimately the real challenge. And my underlying question here is, what does the cloud help us do in that part of the process? But Adam, you had a thought. You did? You fooled me. You had your hand, you were gesturing like you did.
Yeah, but that said, I think to lead into something pretty passionate, at least for Andrew and I, is that one of those emergent systems for understanding these new classes of information is curation. And what curation involves, how it's passed and promoted and so on. Because when you're dealing with those thousands of videos, ultimately the person who's gone and watched enough to make something that's coherent and interesting is a value, and that's something which is an issue which Playground is dealing with.
Yeah, and I think kind of behind the scenes, what you say makes me think about is that really what the Playground is about so not like there is an authority that all students look to, but the authoritative version is created in the very diverse forms that these challenges take. So, the example of curation is a really good one. So I think it would be very difficult to take a look at any of the, let's say, YouTube channels and say, well, one is more authoritative, more successful than another, except perhaps on kind of a ranking system, which is a popularity contest. So that's a kind of authority, but it may not be the only one out there. So, but I think this really hits on, this is something we're working with right now and really thinking about, is how to get different versions to rise or fall, or even to navigate. If you think about the challenges of different students creating different versions of a particular multimedia presentation, how do you navigate all of them? How do you kind of wrap your hands around all of them? How do you kind of draw the lines?
And I think these elements, like the curator or the recommender system or the blogger whose blogs I follow because I'm really sympathetic to the particular tone and framework of analysis and so on. Those are all what I would consider the infrastructure that mediate between the production of stuff that is the cloud, and my own sense of how do I make my way in the world in this moment of information plenitude. These are infrastructures. We used to have the church, we used to have editorial boards, we used to have, again, like, master teachers and so on. We used to have disciplinary curricula that were very lockstep, right? In the English department, you couldn't do the 18th century until you had done the 17th century. We used to have those infrastructures. Now we're evolving new infrastructures. So the recommender system is a huge thing, right? I now know there are recommenders I trust, not because of authenticity or credentials, but because I grok where they come from, or I'm sympathetic, or we're simpatico because I think they see the world, or they've got my sense of humor about me, or so on and so forth. So, we end up and are seeing now the emergence, and these are the social and human practices that are mediating, really. The other thing, and I'm going to go to your point about the 5 points, the other thing is that we're still not so good at, and this is my classroom issue, is, and God bless Google, right, for making the information plenitude more accessible, but we've turned knowledge seeking into keyword searching. And now to do the pedagogy, which is what I struggle with now, of turning keyword searching into the formulation of a question, and how to teach people how to ask questions. And the cloud isn't good about answering questions in the way they think it should be with keyword searching, right? Because you get 5, 10, 15, 100,000 pages of keyword searching. I want them to learn how to ask the question, what would have happened if, we had lost World War II? That's not a cloud question, although insights about answering or addressing that question that's exactly where they need to go.
I just want to encourage the audience to come to the microphones and join this conversation, and I warn you, I know enough of you by name, I'll start calling on people. So,
or feel free to use the back channel we have going.
Exactly.
So, Anne, I do have a question then. Is there a difference? We talk about cloud, the cloud that we're used to using, and basically that information transparency that we've all brought into our own lives. Is there a difference between that cloud, the public cloud, and the educational cloud, the cloud that we want to use in school?
And then I'm going to ask you, and then is there a difference between that everyday cloud that I kind of take, from my maps to my Yelp and so on, my educational cloud, and then business enterprise cloud, the cloud that you rely on, your engineers rely on, your computer scientists rely on, and so on. So is the cloud is the cloud.
So yeah, for us, there is a big difference between the cloud for consumers and the cloud for business. First and foremost, it's about the SLA, the service level agreement between the provider and the consumer. Consumers generally don't care about such things. Enterprises care desperately about such things. What level of uptime can I expect? What happens if you don't reach that level of uptime? So on and so forth. That's something which is just, Google doesn't coming from the consumer side isn't necessarily oriented around providing those kinds of things, particularly not to their consumers. A free service, why am I going to make any guarantees there? On the enterprise side, that really matters. There are a number of other enterprise capabilities, things, backup security, tracking, and so on, which just are not relevant to the consumer. So there's this big difference in capability between what the cloud needs to be for the enterprise and what it needs to be for the consumer. And there are these hurdles that we have to jump over, both as providers. Okay, how do we gain the trust of consumers? It's not like, well, you can put out and invest billions of dollars in providing an enterprise cloud service. No one will use it unless they trust you, unless they trust your data and ability to handle it, and that's built up over time. By the same token, they're not going to use you if they don't trust the environment. That is, if they think that that they're going to come down a new set of rules regarding data handling, let's say HIPAA or something like that, that's going to invalidate whatever they do on the cloud. They need stability in the regulatory environment. These are all prerequisites, and it sort of speaks to the technological revolution. It's not about progression technology, it's about the progression of a whole bunch of individual, exactly. So I think that you can differentiate between the two. And furthermore, I just want to identify that it exists. Within the enterprise cloud, you have different sets of requirements that sort of create, the private cloud, the public sector cloud, the public cloud utilities, and so on. And so I suppose what I would like to understand is, does education slot in there, or is education a different silo from the consumer public cloud, from the enterprise cloud and its various types?
Or is one of our projects as educators to describe that ontology? So again, it's not even the critical so much as you were saying, but to just understand what is the structure and the ontological status of the cloud. Is not the cloud. It's going to be with very different requirements for enterprise as it would be for my classroom or, again, my mobile use when I'm wandering as a consumer.
Yeah, and I think it brings up another kind of related point, is that cloud computing, oh, sorry.
It's okay.
No, okay, John can go.
Okay, so I just wonder if there's not a cultural barrier. We've been talking about cultural versus strategy barrier that we have to overcome here, which is twofold. One of which is, do I leave all my stuff in the care of Azure, Microsoft's Azure? And do I trust that I can get it back in the same place that I put it and at any time I want? So that's the first question. And the second question, which relates to what JSB and Doug were talking about in their book, which is a lot of what, and you're relating to education in the cloud, and what Andrew you did, and what Jessie you helped us with, is collaborative work. How do we as teachers judge collaborative work? How do we grade collaborative work? How do we know if one person on a 5-person team wasn't a complete slacker and their classmates won't rat them out, So those are my two cultural questions.
So, do you mind if can I take all right, I'll take the first one, and then maybe kick the second one down the road a bit. But I think the question of kind of what are the cultural barriers is a really good way to get to the idea of, what does it really take to get the idea of cloud computing adopted in the educational environment. And Anne, I think you're pretty good about explicitly framing this as, it's technology, but technology related, but it's also a very social problem in the playground, in other approaches that new media literacies uses. I mean, we talk a lot about social and emotional learning. And I think it's important to think about, Jessie, you mentioned previously, in terms of mainframe computing and time sharing, that the idea that you could have your stuff stored somewhere and have programs run in a place other than your home is actually quite old. And it's really only the personal computer has really given this idea of, well, we own our software, we own our stuff, it's on our computer, it's right there. I can, in some ways, I have an emotional connection to it. So I think there's a tremendous challenge in terms of trust. But I think there have been problems in terms of, if you think about sort of a rental model, video rentals, or the trust that you need to use something like a credit card. We maybe look back at some of those barriers as well. And then to the emotional side, part of it is kind of getting around some of this kind of like you know, as much as we joke about, you know, floppy disks, there are people out there who do say, you know, where the heck is my floppy disk, or where's my USB stick, or, you know, all of these things. And I think really, not to steal the thunder of the discussion at 4 about the speed bumps, but I think one thing that might come up, which would be really tragic, is if the cloud computing kind of happens, and it happens outside of the classroom, you're going to exacerbate this gap between students and teachers, so the students will be using cloud computing at home, and I think they're really going to be the ones who are going to pick it up and run with it and say, hey, you know, I don't really, you know, think too much about where my stuff is stored necessarily. I don't have this emotional attachment to owning my data. I think they're really going to be the ones to pick it up and run with it. So I think we have to be careful that we're not exacerbating kind of an already problematic situation.
Well, let me answer maybe the other part of the question. Okay. A question about how we sort of evaluate collaboration. That goes sort of back to my earlier point that, you know, part of it we are very focused on how to consume cloud, and I think it's useful, especially in education space, to also see how to create using cloud. This is not related to Verizon, but out of my own personal interest, one of the projects I'm sort of working on right now is a collaborative construction of a movie. That's purely a sort of a research idea where people in different areas produce a full production movie, which written by one person, and the whole movie is done in a green screen background, just like people have seen, like, you know, Sin City or something, that kind of movie. Each actor is in a different place, and have sort of done their acting pieces and have submitted separately. And then there's a one producer who actually pulls the different pieces together. And the whole movie is being done between 7 people, and those 7 people are not in the same city. So this is probably an extreme example of a collaborative product development done separately. But I think it is interesting, John, to your question, for thinking more about how we design projects using newer technologies, be it social networks and cloud and stuff, that will enforce and evaluate, like this kind of a project, as I'm saying, this is probably an extreme project, sort of forces a collaboration between these 7 people who are in different places and gives you exact idea that, okay, you know, this guy did this piece, and you can say, okay, this piece was done very badly, but heroine in the movie was really good, she did her acting well and all of that. But that required sort of the effort went into not defining cinematography as much, but to design of this project as a whole. And I think that's probably a challenge that we have to think about in an education space, utilizing this technology, how to define new kind of programs for the students.
But
It seems like
an environment while you're having teams cooperate over distance, you have trouble with the same problem of how to evaluate?
No, I mean, the 2,000 people who are on the Google research, they just spent the last week evaluating each other because it's the end of the first quarter, and they have to have, every project has to have an evaluation by each person of every person who worked in the project. So, I mean, they've institutionalized, bureaucratized, you know, very extensive peer-to-peer, project-based collaborative team evaluations. Managers don't evaluate the project teams. The project team members evaluate each other. So they're not given the option not to rat somebody out.
Yeah, John, let's make sure that we're not asking a two-dimensional question about a three-dimensional problem. That is, it's difficult to evaluate from, you know, the final product all that went on. Someone who barely touched the final product may have had an important role as a coordinator or something like that. Yeah.
I think that's something that has to evolve for us.
Well, just adding a note before we turn to JSB here, it seems like this is one of those areas where practice will migrate from the enterprise side into the educational side, where the private sector is way ahead of higher education in particular, less so K through 12, in terms of of collective action and collaborative work, and figuring out how to do things like evaluation. But this could be a way where tools migrate into the academic world and bring with them new forms of establishing authority, where it's actually the collaboration itself becomes an element of authority in a way that didn't exist in the Gutenberg age of authority.
Yeah, I think, first of all, in building what you just said, it's curious at Google that Sergey himself gets created by everybody around him too. So it's not just up to a certain level, but goes all the way to the very top. And it's a really interesting experience. But I want to come back and build on this issue of authority. We saw it here at the Crunch. What we're moving into is a world in which now our students and all of us can create things with amazing facility using power tools, collaborative tools, and so on and so forth. So maybe we should stop worrying about the correctness of the answer, but look more at what gets built. The curious thing to me is an open sourcer. I never worry about kind of the authority. I worry about where this sucker runs, and I get to run it. I get to see it. Okay? And the fact is, we now continuing building, and we have so powerful. The examples came up at lunch. These are amazing things being built. Okay? You can tell if the thing runs or not. There's kind of ground truth in the running. As ground truth and business film come together, and so on and so forth. And I really think we're moving into a world in which basically having to have this decontextualized, abstract authority gets replaced by what am I building? And what questions do I ask about it? As you know, having run Park for many years, I will say that I have never, ever looked at a transcript. I just don't care how somebody did. But I want to see what they did, and then I want to be able to interview them. And in that interview, I can tell what they did. And I think we're going to move more and more to that kind of world.
Yeah, and I'd like to second what John was talking about, because I think asking the question of how do I grade a collaborative project sort of begs the fact that you think the world's going to stay the same. I think what we're really talking about is just a real whack in our heads, and it's a whole new world, and we can't just keep a piece from the old world and think we can shove it into the new world. So I think that's what's really going on. Is the whole world's changing.
I just want to thank Jessie. That's an excellent comment. I passionately believe in that. And that's why I sort of made these points multiple times during this conversation, that I think going after, frankly, most of the discoveries in, I come from a science and engineering background, happens by, Einstein didn't read about theory of relativity and then sort of corrected it. He was faced with a problem first, and he was trying to find information to fix that problem. Starting with a problem for not have the problem set at the end of the chapter, have it at the beginning of the chapter and have the chapter afterwards. So it is a little bit upside down, but I think as the new models of quick information access sort of facilitates actually switching that order. And that's, I think, so what you were saying.
Yeah.
Okay, but John, I want you to go back and start running Park again, because although I will totally believe you never read a transcript, no transcript got to your desk that wasn't imprinted by an engineering or computer science or some other set of degrees that already kind of pre-selected. I mean, so what I want is not only don't read the transcript, but don't isolate the only people you want to hire to do innovation to be those coming out of computer science and engineering. Because I know when I showed up as a humanist there, they didn't even have the category of what a humanist was. They kept calling me a humanitarian, because I was, which is a good thing, but I just know I was so, kind of out of their minds. So what I would like to do is not only not read the transcripts, I would also like, our hiring people to also not read so much the disciplines, because the issue about collaboration across disciplinary perspectives that then changes all the reproduction of those perspectives. They will never be disciplined in the same way once they have interacted with one another.
That's for my communications.
We have time for one closing comment. Jessie? We have a question. We have a question.
Hi, Jonathan Aronson. Everybody's been talking about the cloud. There are really a lot of clouds. As a telecom guy, I used to worry about things like number portability. And I wonder how much concern there should be about moving your own information from one cloud to another. Because if you're paying somebody to hold your information, they're going to try to hold on to it.
I guess that's for me. So that was the case with number portability. Well, number portability works, right? So you can take your phone wherever, so it shouldn't be concerned. But moving to the point, it's a valid commercial point that whoever is heavily building clouds today, one of the business case around doing that investment is that if a customer believes and selects you as the cloud, then we will house your information, be it Microsoft Azure or Google or Verizon, whoever it is. And the hope would be that makes that service a lot more sticky. Now, if your question is, would the companies hold you hostage because we got all of your data, from your pictures to movies to your life history, is in our quote-unquote cloud, and tomorrow you want to switch to company Y, you're going to get stuck. There is no model on that today. Is that to be concerned about? I am a big cloud user. I am not, for the following reason. I feel just like how number portability got worked out at some point, commercial market will, let alone any kind of regulation, commercial market will not allow that. So if a company X is going to hold your information back and if Google will not let you port your email or forward your email, for example, simple things, or download and sort of switch from one cloud to the other, the backlash in the marketplace will be so hard that that by itself will course correct. So my answer, there's no real answer on it. My answer is I wouldn't be that concerned. Having said that, I can tell you all commercial concerns do hope that will make it more sticky and you will stay with us.
So, do you believe that a regulatory remedy will be necessary there?
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think that would be, commercial forces would not even need us to go there.
I think the back channel might have some disagreement, but just some comments up there that I saw. But I think it's a good discussion to have, right?
And it's a discussion that I think we're going to have to leave for the next session. But thank you all for moving this conversation forward. And please thank the panel.